He is, of course, one of the most recognizable faces in the world, and he just happens to be our very own Prime Minister. At the end of this, his first year in office, some say the honeymoon is ending, while others believe the best is yet to come. Refugee crisis, climate change, spending, and a possible Trump presidency are just some of the things on Prime Minister Trudeau's plate. And here to talk to us about all of this is the man himself. Thank you for joining us this morning, Mr. Prime Minister.
Good morning, Joanne. It's good to chat with you.
So happy to chat with you at the end of your first year. I want to start things off this morning with a conversation about the Syrian refugees. This, of course, was one of your biggest challenges, to bring in thousands of Syrian refugees. And with the continued unrest in that part of the world, what are the goals for the next year, and how well do you think things have gone so far? Well,
first of all, it was a challenge for me, but it was a much bigger and more important challenge that all Canadians took on. I mean, quite frankly, the government can only do so much. And the fact that communities, individuals, families, provinces, municipalities all stepped up to welcome in these families seeking to build a better life, as so many Canadians had been themselves welcomed in, or their ancestors welcomed into this country. The fact is, this was a good opportunity for us to show that Canada wants to be helpful and part of the solution, and that we understand that being welcoming towards others is actually a great way of building success for ourselves here at home and creating opportunities. So there's certainly challenges in it, and there will continue to be challenges, but I think we can all be very, very proud of the message we sent to people looking for a better life, but also to countries around the world who should be encouraged to do more.
Well, speaking of countries around the world, you mentioned everybody working together. I'm sure, like many Canadians, you're watching very closely what's happening down south with the election. Depending on what happens in November, I'm wondering how you envisage or potentially see working with a potential Donald Trump.
Well,
as
Canadians,
president.
Canadians asked me to do something very important, which is stand up for Canada and Canadians' interests, whether it's economic or cultural or social around the world. And that means working with whomever the Americans choose as their next president. And that's exactly what I'm going to do.
Talking about some of the spending, you had promised a lot of money for Native Affairs. We're talking about the inquiry, of course, into missing and murdered Native and Aboriginal women. That is going forward. That is great news. But in terms of education, there was a lot of money that was being promised to help increase the quality of education for the different Native communities. Some of that money is going to be held back for a little while. What do you say to the communities who are saying that they've waited long enough and they need better services, especially when it comes to education?
Oh, we agree. There needs to be much better education and more funding. That's why we put forward historic levels of funding, $8.4 billion over the next 5 years for Indigenous education, for infrastructure, for ending boil water advisories, for a broad range of things. But we also know that it is just a start. But one of the challenges of the past is that Ottawa has always imposed or felt like we had the best solution to fix the challenges Indigenous peoples were facing across the country. And right now we know we need to be more partners, we need to be respectful, we need to let Indigenous communities lead on important issues like education of their young people. And that's why we're working with them to make sure that they have the capacity to make those changes in the right way. And that's not going to be a short-term challenge, it's a long-term challenge, but it's one that we're working on right now because it's so urgent at the same time.
Mr. Trudeau, you were in Montreal a little while ago. You must have seen or must have noticed some of the traffic and construction situation happening in our fair city. A lot of money is needed in infrastructure, especially for municipalities to spend the money to build on infrastructure. There was a promise in the last election campaign, obviously, that there would be some money for infrastructure. Tell us where we're at on that issue, because Montrealers are desperate for it right now.
Well, we actually have signed historic agreements with the province of Quebec and with Montreal to make sure that money is flowing right now into transit systems, into wastewater upgrades, the kinds of things that are going to make a difference immediately, while at the same time we're working with an ambitious investments in infrastructure in the coming years to create new projects, to create new opportunities. The fact is, in the past 10 months alone, we've invested more in infrastructure than the previous government did in 5 years, right across the country. country. We know how important it is to invest in our communities, to get good jobs for people right now, but create possibilities for economic growth and better jobs in the future by making sure that our roads, our bridges, our subway systems, our housing, our low-income housing, all those things are being addressed.
Mr. Prime Minister already is talking about, of course, the report card, the grade that you are getting after this first year. Tell me a little bit about how you would grade yourself, how you feel about your own performance in this first year.
Well, I think we've done some really important big things that are making a difference in people's lives. I'm thinking of the fact that one of the first things we did was lower taxes on the middle class and raise them on the wealthiest 1%. The fact that as of this summer, the Canada Child Benefit is flowing out to 9 out of 10 Canadian families with more money for people who need it, less for those who don't. And that's going to lift 300,000 kids out of poverty, over 60,000 in Quebec alone. So we know that these are things that are making a real difference in people's lives. We fixed the Canada Pension Plan. We've improved an awful lot of things, but there's still a lot more to do. So I'm going to focus on getting it done. I'll let other people worry about grading me.
And Mr. Prime Minister, I can't let you go without asking you. You were in Montreal. We are in Montreal. How do you think the Habs are going to do this season?
Oh, you know what? Off to a great start against Pittsburgh. It'll be even better once Kerry gets over the little bit of a cold that he seems to have right now.
We just had Angela Price in our studio, so go Habs go at the end of the day.
Go Habs go, no question about that.
Thank you so much for taking the time for us, Mr. Prime Minister. That is our Prime Minister Justin Trudeau joining us live this morning.